It's just after sunset. A small group is sitting around a fire, and out past the light, something is watching them. Two eyes catch the glow for half a second, then disappear into the dark. That animal in the dark isn't a lion, and it isn't a bear. It's something that doesn't exist anymore, a saber-tooth cat, one of the most dangerous hunters that ever lived alongside us. For hundreds of thousands of years, early humans lived side by side with these animals. No guns, no walls, no locked doors, just fire, teamwork, and a lot of hard-earned knowledge about how to stay alive. So how did they actually do it? How did ordinary people with simple tools survive next to an animal built to kill things twice their size? That's what this video is about. First, let's clear something up. Saber-tooth tiger is actually the wrong name. These cats weren't tigers at all, and they weren't closely related to any cat alive today. The most famous one is called Smilodon. It lived in North and South America, and it looked more like a giant muscular bobcat than a tiger. Short tail, thick front legs, and two curved canine teeth that could grow close to a foot long. In Europe, Asia, and Africa, there was a different saber-tooth called Homotherium. It had longer legs than Smilodon, more like a hyena's build, which suggests it may have chased prey across open ground instead of just ambushing it. Both of these animals were built for one thing: taking down large, heavy prey: bison, camels, young mammoths, giant ground sloths, animals that outweighed a human many times over. Their long teeth weren't good for chewing or fighting. They were precision tools, made for one deep, fatal bite to the throat or belly of prey that had already been pinned down. That also meant something important. Those teeth were fragile. If a saber-tooth broke one fighting something that fought back hard, it could lose its ability to hunt and slowly starve. So these were animals built around one strategy: get close without being seen, strike fast and hard, and finish it in seconds. What they were not built for was a long, messy fight. And that one detail, that they relied on surprise, not brute force fighting, turns out to be the key to understanding how humans survived them at all. This wasn't a short overlap. Early humans and saber-tooth cats shared the same land for an enormous stretch of time, going back hundreds of thousands of years, long before modern humans even existed. Older human relatives, like Neanderthals, lived through this overlap in Europe and Asia. Later, when our own species, Homo sapiens, spread out of Africa, they walked straight into saber-tooth territory too. In the Americas, Smilodon and early humans crossed paths for thousands of years before Smilodon finally went extinct somewhere around 11 or 12,000 years ago. This means saber-tooths weren't some rare, occasional danger. For an early human, they were simply part of the landscape, like knowing which rivers flood or which plants make you sick. And that's actually a clue to how people survived them. When a danger is constant instead of rare, communities don't survive by luck. They survive by building habits and rules around it. So the real story here isn't about one heroic fight. It's about generations of people passing down a shared set of habits that kept the group alive one season at a time. Let's go through what those habits actually were, starting with the single biggest advantage early humans had over every predator around them. If there's one tool that changed everything for early humans, it's fire. Cats, including saber-tooth cats, are naturally cautious around open flame. It's bright, it's loud when it crackles, and it doesn't behave like anything in their normal environment. So the simplest, most effective defense wasn't a weapon at all. It was keeping a fire burning through the night, especially in open camps where there was nowhere else to hide. Someone usually stayed awake to feed the fire and keep watch. It wasn't a formal job with a title. It was just something that had to be done, and everyone took turns. Fire also meant cooked food, and cooked food meant less time spent chewing and digesting, and more energy for everything else, including staying alert. And smoke itself had a use. A smoky, well-used camp probably carried a strong human scent that lingered in the area, one more small signal telling a predator that this spot wasn't worth the risk. This is why so many early campsites show the same pattern archaeologists still find today: a ring of ash, burnt bone, and charcoal built up over years of the same fire being lit in the same spot. Fire didn't make saber-tooths disappear, but it shrank the danger down to something people could actually manage. Instead of an unpredictable threat, it became a problem with a known solution. But fire alone wasn't enough. It worked at night, around camp. During the day, out hunting or gathering, people needed a different kind of protection, and that came from each other. A lone person on an open plain was an easy target for an ambush predator. A group of 6 or 8 people moving and talking together was a completely different story. Saber-tooth cats hunted through stealth. Their whole strategy depended on getting close before being noticed. A group of alert people, talking, watching different directions, made that surprise almost impossible to pull off. Children stayed close to adults. Adults took turns watching the edges of the group instead of only looking straight ahead. It wasn't a strict formation, just a habit that came from experience. This is actually very similar to how animals like zebras and wildebeest survive lions today, not through individual strength, but through numbers, awareness, and sticking together. Loud noise mattered too. Talking, calling out, even singing while walking wasn't just social. It announced a group's presence well before anyone got close, which is exactly what an ambush hunter doesn't want. When a group did spot a saber-tooth in the distance, the response was usually not to run. Running can trigger a chase instinct in a predator. Instead, the group would bunch together, make noise, and back away slowly. It's the same idea buffalo use against lions. Standing together and facing the threat is often safer than turning your back and bolting. None of this guaranteed safety, but it stacked the odds heavily in their favor, and over generations, those habits became second nature, taught early and never forgotten. Beyond fire and numbers, early humans relied on something harder to see, but just as important: knowledge of the land itself, passed down and refined over generations. Saber-tooth cats needed cover to ambush from: tall grass, thick brush, rocky outcrops, or narrow passages between boulders. Open, flat ground with good visibility was much safer to cross. So people learned to plan their routes, walking along open ridgelines instead of through dense brush, crossing narrow canyons quickly instead of lingering. Small choices like this added up over a lifetime. Water sources were another area of caution. Predators of all kinds tend to wait near rivers and waterholes, since prey animals have to visit them eventually. Humans knew this too and treated those spots carefully. Fresh tracks, scratch marks on trees, half-eaten carcasses, these were all read like a warning sign. If a group saw evidence a saber-tooth had been through recently, they'd often change their route entirely. Even the time of day mattered. Many big cats, saber-tooths included, are thought to have been most active around dawn, dusk, and at night, so the riskiest travel windows were treated with extra caution. None of this was written down anywhere. It was just lived experience, told as stories around the fire, until every child in the group grew up already knowing which ground was safe to walk on. Early humans didn't rely on strength to fight off saber-tooths. They weren't strong enough for that. Instead, they relied on tools that let them fight or escape from a distance. The spear was the basic and most important tool. A long spear meant a predator had to get past several feet of sharpened wood before it could reach a person at all.
Some early spears were designed to be thrown, not just held. A well-thrown spear could injure an animal from a safe distance, which was a much better option than waiting for it to get close. Later on, some human groups used a tool called an atlatl, a kind of handheld lever that launched a spear much farther and much faster than an arm alone ever could. But here's the honest truth. These weapons weren't really designed to win a fight against a saber-tooth. They were designed to buy time, a few seconds to back away, climb, or reach the group. Fighting a saber-tooth head-on was a last resort, not a plan. The real goal every single time was to avoid ever reaching that moment in the first place. Sharp thrown rocks, fire-hardened wooden points, and even burning branches pulled straight from a campfire could all serve as quick defensive tools if a predator got too close, too fast.
The goal of every tool wasn't to make a person as strong as a saber-tooth. It was to make the whole situation less appealing to a predator that depended on easy, low-risk prey. Here's something people don't usually think about. One of the most dangerous moments wasn't necessarily meeting a saber-tooth while it was hunting. It was coming across a kill it had already made. A fresh carcass meant free meat, which was tempting, but it also meant the predator that made the kill was very likely still nearby, guarding its food. Kill sites also attracted other scavengers, dire wolves, giant vultures, and other predators, all drawn by the smell of blood. A single carcass could turn into a crowded, dangerous scene very quickly. So groups learned to be extremely cautious around any carcass they found, watching from a distance first, checking for movement in the grass, and listening before ever getting close. If it looked safe and the meat was worth the risk, people sometimes worked quickly, cutting what they could and leaving fast rather than lingering in a spot that clearly belonged to something else. This exact pattern, big predators, scavengers, and carcasses all overlapping in one place, is actually how we know so much about saber-tooths today, thanks to sites like the La Brea tar pits in California. Trapped animals drew in predators looking for an easy meal, and many of those predators got stuck too. Thousands of Smilodon fossils have been pulled from that one location alone. For early humans, the lesson was simple. A meal that looked easy sometimes wasn't. Caution around any unclaimed food source wasn't overreacting. It was just good sense, learned the hard way. Here's something that changes the picture even more. Some researchers think Smilodon may not have hunted completely alone. There's fossil evidence suggesting at least some saber-tooth cats lived and hunted in groups. That evidence comes from healed injuries found on Smilodon bones, badly broken legs, damaged hips, and other wounds that a lone predator likely couldn't have survived without help getting food. If an animal survived long enough for those bones to heal, that suggests other cats let it feed at kills, or at least tolerated it staying nearby, the way lion prides sometimes support injured members today. This is still debated among scientists, and it may have varied between species and regions, but if true, it means some human groups weren't just avoiding one hunter, they were avoiding a small hunting team. That raises the stakes for everything we already covered. Fire, numbers, noise, careful movement through the landscape, all of it mattered even more if the danger wasn't just one animal, but several working together. It also might explain why human groups leaned so heavily on cooperation themselves. Facing a predator that could work as a team, the safest response was to never be caught working alone. Caves and rock shelters were valuable for early humans, but they came with a catch. Predators, including big cats, liked good shelter too. Before settling into any cave, groups would check it carefully, looking for tracks, bones, claw marks, or fresh scent that might mean it was already being used by something else. A cave with a single narrow entrance was actually valuable, even though it sounds risky. It meant a group only had to defend one direction, instead of watching every side at once. A fire near the entrance did double duty, warmth for the group inside and one more barrier for anything trying to get in from outside. Some groups also blocked cave entrances at night with branches, rocks, or brush, not enough to stop a determined predator completely, but enough to make noise if something tried to get through.
This kind of careful, repeated behavior, checking, clearing, blocking, is part of why caves used by early humans often show clear, long-term patterns of use, layer after layer, generation after generation. None of these habits meant anything if they weren't passed on. A group's survival knowledge only mattered as long as someone remembered it and taught it to the next generation. Children likely learned these lessons early, through stories, through watching adults, and eventually through supervised practice, throwing a spear at a target, learning to read tracks, learning which terrain to avoid. Mistakes were part of learning too, but the margin for error was much smaller than it is today. A single bad decision near the wrong terrain could be the last one someone ever made. That's likely why so much of this knowledge shows up in story form, even in cultures much later in history. Myths and legends about big cats and monsters in the dark aren't random. They're old survival lessons dressed up as stories. Stories are easier to remember than lists of rules. Don't walk through tall grass at dusk turns into a story about a hunter who ignored that advice, and the lesson sticks for life. In this way, surviving saber-toothed cats wasn't really about any single person being brave or strong. It was about an entire community holding on to shared knowledge, generation after generation. Saber-toothed cats didn't stay around forever. By roughly 10 to 12,000 years ago, both Smilodon and Homotherium had gone extinct, along with many other large Ice Age animals. The exact reasons are still debated, but most researchers point to a mix of factors happening at the same time rather than one single cause. The climate was warming and changing quickly at the end of the Ice Age. Cold grasslands that once supported huge herds of prey animals were shrinking and shifting into forest and different terrain. As the big herds of mammoths, giant sloths, and other megafauna declined, the animals Sabertooth depended on for food became harder and harder to find. At the same time, human populations were growing and spreading, hunting many of the same large animals for their own survival, adding even more competition for a shrinking amount of prey. A specialized hunter like Smilodon, built specifically for taking down big, slow prey, struggled to adapt when that specific kind of prey became scarce. Being highly specialized is powerful until the world changes. So it likely wasn't humans hunting Sabertooth to extinction directly. It was a combination of a changing world and shrinking food, with human competition adding extra pressure on top of it. It's a reminder that even one of the most fearsome predators in history wasn't invincible. It was just as dependent on its environment staying stable as any other animal. So, when we ask how ancient humans survived saber-toothed cats, the honest answer isn't about strength, and it isn't about winning. It's about avoiding them almost entirely. Fire that kept the dark at a distance, groups that watched every direction, knowledge of the land passed down through stories that turned danger into something predictable and manageable. Every single one of those habits took generations to build, and every one of them had to be taught again and again to every new child born into the group. Saber-toothed cats are gone now, but the world our ancestors built their habits around, full of real, constant danger, shaped an enormous amount of how humans learned to live together. Cooperation, storytelling, watching out for each other, reading the environment carefully, all of it started as survival, and in a lot of ways, it's still part of how people live today. If you enjoyed this one, there's a lot more Ice Age history where this came from. Let me know in the comments what you'd like to see next, and I'll see you in the next video.